And for those who enjoy this channel and would love to support us financially, please feel free to hit that donate link. We'd greatly appreciate it. God bless.
Praise,
yeah,
you forget
okay. Yeah.
praise.
Get here. Got
All
a
right,
button
this
you need
should
to
be
hit.
fixed.
Should be fixed. Okay, well, as
So
I'm talking,
restart everything.
restart it all. Praise. Is this an April Fool's joke?
I wish it
Okay.
was.
I wish it was too. No problem. Sorry, guys, if you couldn't hear us. We like to avoid technical difficulties, but yeah, like we were saying, thanks for joining us tonight. We've got a really exciting debate. James Downard, NephilimFree, both of these gentlemen don't need an introduction, so I'm sure everybody knows who they are. We're going to be having mostly a discussion-based debate with a couple short openings. We have up to 10 minutes opening statements, 6-minute rebuttals, 50-minute discussion, but whatever the debaters don't use for their openings or their rebuttals, we'll toss into either the discussion or the question and answer. We're looking forward to a good question and answer period today. So tag either myself or John Maddox. John Maddox is the co-mod today. So yeah, this is going to be an exciting debate. We're going to keep the discussion portion a free-flowing dialogue, though, in hopes that neither John or myself are going to have to jump in. We'll leave it up to James and Neff. But of course, if we have to, we want to keep it as equally timed as possible. If we have to jump in, we will. We are neutral for this debate as moderators, so we're going to make sure that it goes smooth. Before we go into any opening statements, though, I'm going to give the debaters, we can start with James here. Thanks for giving us your time to just a brief introduction, what they're doing at their channel, who they are, type thing. So thanks for joining us, James.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've gone from a writer working in his den to a socially distanced writer working in his den. So it's been a gigantic change in lifestyle for me. So I do my evolution hour every Wednesday on sundry topics. That's 7 p.m. Pacific, and a wee tiny little book that Jackson Wheat and I, who's in the live chat, have come up with. The Rocks Were There, Volume 1. And by the way, everybody in the live chat, we're expecting questions, lots of questions. It's on you, gang.
James is right. We like a good question and answer. So I'll reiterate, please tag either myself or John Maddox. We'll make sure the tag has to be there just so we can make sure we see it. And we're going to hopefully get to all of them during this debate. So we're looking forward to it. Neff, few words there, brother?
Well, nothing special happening with me. I'm just doing what I always do, research and debate, and working on a Christian apologetics website. It's a slow-going thing because I'm not motivated to work on it a whole lot, but just pretty much the same thing, just doing what I normally do, and I'm looking forward to this debate with James.
Awesome. Well, yes, we're looking forward to it as well. We said it earlier when we were muted, nobody heard, but we're doing our best to keep everybody entertained during this time of quarantine. So lots of discussions and debates that you can go watch. We've had a few really good ones in the last few days, and more to come as well. But that's all for me. We'll hand it over to, I guess, the first debater. I think it's RJ. You agreed to go first for your 10 minutes.
Yep.
Awesome.
So
Okay.
if I'm ready to rip, I will extempore. Flood and flood geology and Noah's Ark and all of that bit is a fascinating subject. And if it were true, it would be really momentous. So we would all want to know about all of that. It's had the modern version of flood geology, the sort of thing that Nephi represents, Nephilim, is a relatively recent phenomenon. It comes from George McCready Price back in the 1920s with Seventh-day Adventism. And then got filtered, de-adventized by creation science with Henry Morris in the 60s and 70s, and then it has continued down to the present. So it's a relatively recent phenomenon, but overlaps an awful lot of contemporary geology work, so we can do a lot of measuring in terms of how good it is at explaining stuff versus the alternative paradigm. And from my point of view here, I just like to think, where was the flood in Spokane, where I live? I'm on top of the Columbia basalt, and then there's a thin little veneer of sediment that was laid down in not a flood, but floods, at least a dozen or more of the Missoula glacial ice dam breakups. So there's a fascinating geological frame going on in here, and I know by observation that the creationist community hasn't really accounted for any of that stuff. Whether it's Malcolm Ord and John Woodmorath misrepresenting the Columbia basalt, claiming that it was generated during the flood, which is just claptrap, is not pillow lava, to the very distinctive deposits that we get from all of those Missoula floods. They're not bringing in big slurry of land. They're not laying down Grand Canyons. They're carving out canyons, and we can see the gravel deposits in Lake Coeur d'Alene when the water would slam into that lake and start dropping its heavy debris, then continue on over to actually Lake Columbia, which is where I used to be in Spokane. If we'd gone to time machine back then, 10,000, 15,000 years, we'd be underwater. There used to be a lake here. That was only recently discovered by the geology, because they would find the same gravel kinds of deposits here in that debris plain that's laid down on top of the Columbia basalt. If the flood didn't occur here, if it doesn't account for the Columbia basalt and it doesn't occur as a single event for the Missoula floodings, now we go, what, was there a wall around here? So I hope Nephilim will discuss where he lives and describe for us the flood layer that's there. That's an important factor. Now, beyond that are the people who live here. Spokane Indians, there's various tribal groups that live around in this area. How did they get here? The creationist literature is colossally silent on all of this. It's not merely Native Americans in all through the Americas as to when they came here, how fast, just since 4,300 years ago. And then the same applies to Asia, Australia, Oceania. There's a monstrously large field of demographics that need to be accounted for. And as yet, creationists have not been able to account for that. Though they haven't had a century to work on the subject, it's a topic that they don't deal with. Another area, it has to do with probably the poster child for problems for flood, which is the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians of all the ancient cultures didn't mention the flood at all. They in fact have exactly the opposite view. Nile, flood, every year, good. Nile, not flood this year. Oh, bad, terrible, gnashing of teeth, rending of garments. And so we have an entirely different dynamic with the Egyptians. The creationists have pretty much ignored all of that stuff. Are we getting some strange sounds going on here?
Oh, we got some background noise there. It might be coming from, is that coming from your side, Neff? I know that you bounced out there.
Someone running a dishwasher? I turned my timer off. I'm at about 4 minutes.
Yeah, no problem. I stopped it as well. But I know
okay, there we go. Okay, resuming. The Egyptians are a particularly interesting area because I've been watching for decades to see how the creationist community was going to deal with them. And I knew eventually some were going to have to start moving it. They were going to have to put little rollers underneath all of Egypt because as far as we can tell, the traditional creationist flood geology dates about 2350 BCE, thereabouts. is right in the time when they were building pyramids. They were just not noticing any flood. And so it would be not merely that you had to figure out when the flood was taking place, because the Egyptians are such a distinctive culture, they can't really allow it to straddle any of that period. They have to have the descendants of Noah come in and found the culture and do it all on the fly, short lickety split. So they basically got to move all of Egypt, the dynastic period and the pre-dynastic period and everything down past that, which is a tough haul to do. And so far, none of them have managed to do all of that. So that's another discipline that has to be flushed down the toilet. The other factor is that we, again, have a track record to see, is flood geology workable? Does it actually explain stuff to be useful? And the area that we can clearly see that is petroleum geology, which over the last 100 years has paid zero attention to flood geology. And in fact, every attempt to try to pay attention to it has just come up dry wells. Zion Oil Company is the most notorious example that was going on from the 1980s on down into the 21st century. A lot of stock manipulation going on there, but not oil. So functionally speaking, it's absolutely useless. So Nephilim, I'm sure, will be presenting a lot of discussions, the topic about uniformitarianism, that he'll have his presentation all ready to go. And a lot of us who have been following creationism will have known all about that. It'll be nothing terribly novel. But I'm just looking at it as a comparison to paradigms. The reason why I didn't accept flood geology and the flood model is because it never accounted for the data field. And the more I study that matter, we then get into an even deeper issue of how do they manage to avoid so much data field? In my work, in the rocks were there that I did with Jackson, in the evolution slam dunk before, in my website material, I've been following, gradually building up the notion of source methods, where you look at what arguments to present, what evidence do you argue, and so forth. Well, the creationists can present whatever argument they wish, but if I observe them misrepresenting source material, that's not a good sign, and may also account for why the regular scientific community isn't paying any attention to them. I observe Andrew Snelling, John Woodmarap, Michael Ord, Steve Austin. There's a whole litany of people just specifically on the flood geology area that when you look up the primary source data field that they're citing, they don't say quite what they claim it does, and often they're suppressing information in it. That's a no-no. So coupled with the fact that flood geology is useless and that it has to flush too much of the data field down the stream, and that the reason why it's had such a bad reputation and lack of impact in the sciences is precisely because it does that. So I'm at about 7 minutes. I'm more than happy to give that over to our discussion so we can discuss all that. That's my opening salvo.
Awesome. I think that's a good idea. That's always everybody's favorite part is the discussion. So we'll add that into the discussion period. Thanks for your opening, RJ. Very articulate. So let's hand it over to Neff whenever you're ready, man.
Okay, I'm trying to get my screen to share. For some reason, my browser I'm trying to share is not showing up. Let me close a window and limit the number of windows open. Maybe that will help. Okay, now let me try screen sharing again. This program does this sometimes.
No problem. Take your time.
Still not showing up. Isn't that funny? Okay. So let me try it yet again.
We'll just all we'll blame it on praise. There was a button.
There we go. All right. Okay, I got it.
What pay you the big bucks for there, Praise? Okay, you've got 9 minutes left.
He's been overworking.
He's been up your timer, so I'm just kidding.
All right. Okay.
Get your foot back whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm ready. So uniformitarianism is disproven by the mountainous evidence for the Noahic flood. The continents are covered with an average of 1,800 meters of sedimentary strata. According to the law of horizontality, they are flat when they're initially laid down. As you can see from this image in Ireland, the strata in the earth have clear, defined, distinct boundaries between them. This cannot happen over vast ages of time. Uniformitarianists have no answer for this. These strata laid down rapidly by moving water, and that's why they're sorted like they are, and they have flat, distinct boundaries. Had they been laid down over vast ages of geologic time, one material would blend into the other. They would gradiate going upward. That's not what we see in the geologic column. Therefore, uniformitarianism is wrong. Global mega sequences also provide evidence of the flood. The same formations of strata found on various continents proves that these materials were laid down during a single global event. What you see on the screen now is just a smattering of the numerous scientific papers published in the science journals that demonstrate strata are formed rapidly with particle size distribution, clear distinct boundaries with an absence of erosion between them, and strata form in groups at the same time. The mountains rose up out of the earth just like the Bible says. Whale fossils, sea creature fossils found at the top of the mountains. Here's a folded mountain in Afghanistan, folded like an accordion because the entire materials of all the mountains of the earth were soft and moist materials recently deposited by the flood when they were raised up out of the oceans and squeezed like an accordion. That's why they have folded chevron folds in them like this. And the mountain was sheared off by when it ran into a fast-moving stream of water. This unconformity right here and this chevron fold, as you can see, that's a human being down here. That's how small a human being is. This is a big, big formation. That's a human being. This chevron fold proves that this material was soft and moist when it was compressed with horizontal pressure, and that's why it folded like that. Rock doesn't bend, it breaks. This is Sheep Mountain. I believe it's in Wyoming. The surface, you can see, has been deformed. This proves that the horizontal pressures that squeezed the mountain up out of the earth were the whole mountain was soft, moist materials, just like the rocks here, soft and moist when they were compressed. Solid rock doesn't bend at the surface of the earth. This is the Coelacanths sandstone formation in the American Southwest. Evolutionists have for 100 years, and they're still claiming these materials were laid down by aeolian process, that's wind. But that cannot be true. They possess folded folds, like this parabolic recumbent fold. That can only happen in water. So these sandstone formations were deposited from the Appalachian Mountains area to the American Southwest by the Noahic flood. That's the origin of them, is the Appalachian Mountains. And they were deposited by water, as this parabolic recumbent fold proves. So the evolutionists are wrong when they say they were deposited by wind. Now, what happens when a river, a newly formed river, approaches a mountain? Well, firstly, it's got to go uphill. Water doesn't do that. It follows the path of least resistance. So what will happen when a river, if it manages to go upstream for some crazy reason, uphill, the foothills to the mountain, it will go around the mountain. It won't eat through a mountain. A river will go around it. Okay? It might form a lake and still go around it, but it will not eat through a mountain. So how do we get these? This is called a water gap. There's many of them on the earth. This is where a massive, powerful stream of water moving at very high speed literally ate right through a mountain. It completely ate through the mountain. Now this proves that one thing, the mountain was not solid rock when this happened. The mountain was soft, moist sediments recently deposited by the flood and recently uplifted. That's the reason that the churning water of the river was able to eat through it. Rivers will not eat through a solid rock mountain. They will float around it by following the path of least resistance. These mountains, water gaps in mountains, prove uniformitarianism false. This is a percussion mark. There are many rocks and even massive boulders on the earth which show percussion marks because they were in a massive flow of water moving at very high speed, anywhere from 50 to 150 or more miles per hour, caused by the sheet flow of water receding from the continents during the end stage of the flood. If you think that's a big one, you're not going to believe this. This is a mountain in Wyoming. I'm in California. That hole in the side of a mountain is an impact mark. That's an impact mark. There's an enlargement of it. The boulder that did that weighed more than your city block. What moves a boulder at the speed that when it hits a mountain, it smacks a hole into the side of it? Well, that can't happen under uniformitarianism. That can only happen during a cataclysmic flood. You have to have water moving at tremendous velocity and lots of it for water to smash a hole into the side of a mountain. That could only be explained by the Noahic flood. A massive sheet flow of water perhaps 50 to 300 feet deep, moving at anywhere from 80 to 200 miles per hour, carried a boulder that weighed thousands of tons and smacked right into the side of that mountain. That cannot be explained with uniformitarian process. Here's a quartzite boulder trapped in the side of a mountain, proving the mountain was soft sedimentary strata when it was formed. The boulder actually deforms the moist strata. The coast of Texas is eroding at 4.1 feet per year. Other places in the world are losing 80,000 acres of wetlands every year. 22 to 32 centimeters per year in Dover, England. Here's New Orleans after Katrina. It's literally gone. That's one hurricane. How many hurricanes would happen if the Earth was millions and millions of years old? Well, there wouldn't be any continents. This is 2013. You can see with these steps on the coast of California. And the next picture is 2017. Look how much erosion in just 5 years. This is erosion. This is from the United States government. Each red dot represents 5,000 acres of erodible land that are gone. 5,000. Every yellow dot also represents 5,000. That kind of erosion cannot take place. Each blue dot in this picture represents 200,000 tons of erosion. 200,000 tons of material eroded in a lifespan, a human lifespan. This is the Grand Canyon. You see the pitiful amount of materials that have broken away and landed on the ledges of these rocks. If this Grand Canyon were millions of years old, it would be all rounded down. The entire top of the canyon would be in the bottom.
3 minutes. You've got 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Here's more sediment, more pediments. That's all you've got after a couple of 100 million years or 100 million years? I don't think so. This is Devil's Tower in Wyoming. Look at the pitiful amount of pediment that's at the bottom of it. If that thing had been sticking up out of the earth for 100 million years, it would be rounded off. There'd be a mountain of gravel at the bottom. This is Shiprock in Arizona. Look at the pitiful amount of pediment that's eroded to land at the bottom of it. You could account for that within a few thousand years. You can't do that with millions. This whole thing would be completely gone. More sediments in the bottom of the Grand Canyon, more and more materials eroded away, there would be a mountains full. Methane hydrates, I could talk about that. These very fragile materials right here, structures, are erosion remnants. They're what's left after a massive amount of water, many, many, many square miles, eroded away and left these columns of rock. They can't stand upright for 25 or 500 million years. It's impossible. They would erode away. The only reason that these fragile structures are still here is because there hasn't been millions of years of erosion going on, or they wouldn't be there. So the evidence is vastly overwhelming for uniformitarian geology to be false, and that the flood is true. When I get a chance, if I get a chance, I'd like to show this video. This is engineers, hydrologists at the University of Colorado. In this video, they demonstrate, you can watch it before your very eyes, sedimentary strata forming in groups right before your very eyes. And numerous sedimentary strata experiments just like this have been
1 minute,
conducted.
Neff. 1 minute.
Okay, many times been conducted, and as you can see, the sedimentary strata are forming right before your eyes. This is how fast sedimentary strata form. They don't take weeks, or they don't take millions of years, they don't take thousands of years. They happen. It happens rapidly. Watch this. Look at the strata forming from horizontally from left to the right side of your screen in real time. So strata don't form over millions of years. They form in minutes to seconds, and the entire geologic column formed that way. That's my opening statement.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Neff. We'll throw another minute into the discussion portion. So thanks to both the debaters for really good opening statements. So we're jumping into just short rebuttal rounds before we get into the discussion. So we've got 6 minutes for each of you. I will start your 6 minutes, James, whenever you're ready.
Okay, yeah, it's kind of what I expected. It would be the material, usual talking points. By the way, Nephilim, please, I hope you'll be putting up your various sources for the various geological deposits that you brought up. It's often very difficult to track down the source material on that. You brought up Bertholdt. That's another usual one. Claude Bertholdt's work. That's that sedimentation stuff, that triangle thing. All he did was discover turbidity currents. This is not some vast new discovery. And by the way, Jackson and I in our book investigated one of Bertholdt's paper where he just does some absolutely awful mathematics. They're just colossally wrong numbers on there. So the question that's not discussed here is, you got your layers, how does it turn into rock? Literally zero creationists, not Snelling, not Austin, not Woodmarapp, not Ord, none of them have ever accounted for how the stuff turns into rock. And how the Grand Canyon, not the Bryce Canyon that was on there, that's not 500 million years old. It's much more recent. That's Jurassic rock as you move up above past the Grand Canyon. But how does it turn into rock fast enough for it to have the canyon put through? This is the same material that we get from creationists over and over and over and over again. I hope that we can discuss that matter of where is the flood layer, not in the Grand Canyon, not in Devil's Tower, not in pictures that he's got offline from various unspecified sources that we can't track down the technical literature to find out whether it means what he wants it to. But where is the flood layer where he lives? I've already described the fact that the geology of the Pacific Northwest does not match a big slosh model. I have no problem with catastrophic events. We discuss in The Rocks Were There substantial examples of really big catastrophes. We get some very nice natural events, landslides, and the physical mechanisms for how those things can occur, both underwater and above ground. And these things are connected to volcanic triggers. There's a whole technical literature on that. So stop waving the uniformitarian banner here, and let's move on to some other matters. Let's see what else we had. There was the mega sequences. That's another fascinating one. The mega sequences are not a single gigantic deposit. They are a set of contiguous landscapes. They belong contemporaneously. We have a section on mega sequences in the Rocks Were There when we went into how they were misrepresenting the source material. That when you try to look at the actual documentation of the geology, you discover that there's more to it than what the creationists are reflecting, which is why I urge everybody that's watching this, don't take either one of our word for any of these things. Challenge us on the material. If they have particular issues on that, I'm perfectly capable of responding to it on Twitter or email or whatever to be able to document the stuff. We're happy to do that. We'd love to see Nephilim do that. It's been like pulling teeth to get source material on that from every single subject that you bring up in these videos, like the one you did with Colton on the drop stones, waiting to see your documentation on these things so that we can look at it. Let's see, what are the other? I think that's pretty well covering the main point on there, that he's beating a horse that I'm not arguing, which is somehow that uniformitarianism means you can't have cataclysmic events. You still have unsolved problems in creationism. There's not a single doctrine in modern creationism that is not controversial, whether it's catastrophic plate tectonics, hydraulic sorting, accelerated radioactive decay, that's a corker, the floating forest model, any of these things, hydroplate theory, every one of them has a huge counter argument that's being presented by creationists in the creationist literature. You really should read Institute for Creation Research and Creation Science Quarterly and Answers Research Journal and the Journal of Creation. Down buried in the footnotes a lot of the times are all of the complaints they have about this. So you don't have to rely on those terrible secular geologists to demonstrate that the creationists don't have a coherent model. They demonstrate it by their direct material. So I do hope 4 minutes, we'll give another couple of minutes on the thing. I'm done with my rebuttal.
Awesome. Okay, thanks for that. I'll add, like you said, a couple minutes to the discussion. So Neff, whenever you're ready, I will set the clock. You got 6 minutes. I'll start it at your first word.
Okay. James, you said that young Earth creation, the flood model, the idea of a of global flood is a new idea. That's not true. It's uniformitarianism that's a new idea. Prior to Charles Lyell and his ilk, the geologists, the men of geology of the world, were called scriptural geologists. It's uniformitarianism that replaced in secular science the flood model, not the other way around. You had that wrong. That's wrong history. You say we can't account for the flood because of Native Americans and the history of the Egyptians and whatnot. There's arguments for that. I don't have time to give them. Evolutionists' ideas about the history of the world are wrong, and there's reasons I could explain for that. However, the Table of Nations is verified by human history, and so that kills the uniformitarianist idea about how long the Egyptian culture has been around right there, because we can prove that the names of the men who were in the Table of Nations in the Bible is the names of the earliest empires, kings, cities, and rivers on this earth. And that would not be so if the Tower of Babel affair was not real human history. You point to Getalt's work in the laboratory as though it's an anomaly, but it's not. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of science papers been published in the science journals, which all use the same technology, have been since the 1950s, and all come to the very same conclusion. All demonstrate the very same thing: stratiform horizontally by leading edge distribution in groups, rapidly, right before your eyes. He is not an anomaly. This has been published over and over. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, 5 to 7 such papers are published in the secular journals every single year. So he's not an anomaly. All he's doing is providing the very same evidence in sedimentology that secular sedimentologists provide. Many studies have been published. You say creationists can't deal with, can't explain rock concretion, except geologists who are creationists do it all the time. I don't know why you're behind this times on that. You say, where's the flood layers? Well, that's the tricky question. That doesn't, because we have difficulty pointing to the flood layer, and some will say it's the great unconformity. I'm not convinced of that myself. But that doesn't mean that catastrophism is false or that the flood is false and uniformitarianism is true. Mega sequences aren't contiguous, you said, but they are. They're the same formation of strata, one on top of the other, on one continent and another. I don't know where you got that idea. That's not true. You said creationists say uniformitarianists can't account for cataclysmic events, but no creationist says that uniformitarianists don't accept that cataclysmic events take place. So you've said a number of things that are flatly wrong. I don't know where you're getting this information. Maybe you need better sources. But creationists account for everything that you've said in this. Andrew Snelling and lots of other creationist geologists discuss all these things that you say they don't, like rock concretion, and they even give the chemistry of rock concretion. And so I don't know where you're getting your information from. But this we know. The strata of the Earth have fine, distinct boundaries, one right on top of the other. Laboratory experiments prove strata form together in groups horizontally right before your eyes. This is what explains the geologic column. Because there's an absence of erosion between them, and because of their fine, distinct boundaries, in other words, one doesn't gradiate slowly into another, as one material becomes less available for deposition in the environment and another type becomes more available, then there is no way for uniformitarian time to be squeezed into the geologic column, because the predominant feature of the entire geologic column is that each strata has a fine, distinct boundary with the other and does not merge slowly, does not gradiate into the other, which is exactly what would happen if the strata were formed over a vast period of time. As one material becomes less available for deposition, it becomes less mixed in, and another becomes more available. They're going to blend, and they're going to change from one to the other, and you should see that change, but we don't. What we see in the geologic column is exactly what's demonstrated in the laboratory by numerous sedimentologists, that strata form rapidly, and that's exactly what we see in the geologic column all the way down to the Precambrian rock. So that's my rebuttal.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Neff. Looks like you got about a minute left. We'll put that into the question and answer. We got a lot of good questions coming from the audience, so I want to thank John for gathering all of those. I think we're going to have a really engaging question period. So before that, we've got a discussion. We've got about 55 minutes. I'm going to set the timer for 55 minutes. I know both debaters are passionate, of course, we all are. Let's try and keep it as profitable and respectful as possible. But that's why John and I are here. We'll make sure that it goes smooth. So whoever wants to ask the first question or whoever wants to start it off, go ahead.
Well, I did ask that question about what the flood layer looks like, but since he doesn't want to specify that regarding where he lives, how do you account for the material of the Pacific Northwest where I live?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that. How do I account for it? What specifically?
In the flood model.
Well, I mean,
how did the Columbia
geologic
basalt
column
form?
in that area was laid down just by the flood, just like it is anywhere else globally.
All of it, including the Columbia basalt?
Of course, we know about Bretz's flood and others, right?
Yeah, but what about the Columbia basalt under it?
What about it?
Was that pre-flood or what?
Likely it was uplifted rock from the mantle that took place because of the cataclysmic effects of the earth to the earth by the Noahic flood.
Oh, so that's post-flood.
Not if it's below the surface of the earth. I wouldn't say it's post-flood. No, the Canadian Shield.
How many of these events would there have been in this when hard to tell when it took place thing?
Well, I mean, that's going to be the case everywhere. But what we do know is the earth is covered with 1,800 plus meters of sedimentary strata with fine distinct patterns.
Is this? Whoa. Is this a way of you're saying you don't actually have an answer to that question and you want to move on to something else?
I'd have to see photographs of exactly what you're talking about to be able to address it. I'm not sure. I've said that basalt can be uplifted was uplifted in various places, like the Canadian Shield during the flood.
Have you read anything on the Columbia basalt?
Not much, no.
And so not even creationists? Why not?
Well, I don't know what the creationist scientists have to say about it. I just know that the geologic column was formed by the Noahic flood. There's no other explanation for it.
Well, Woodmarap and Ord claim that it was extruded during the flood.
Okay, maybe they're right about that.
No, they aren't. There are
okay.
Just as we can tell that there's more than one Missoula flood, we can also tell that there were lots and lots and lots of eruptions because each one of the volcanic spurts has slightly different chemical characteristics. Sure. And by the way, none of that's going to show up in your creationist literature because that's another topic they avoid.
I disagree with that. I've watched many lectures by creationist geologists.
Put the links up then. We will be anxious to see those.
The geological event of the flood is what explains the entire geomorphology of this earth. In fact, without cataclysmic...
Will you put the links up?
I'm not going to dig for links while we're in a debate, James. Okay.
No, I don't ask you that you do it now, but will you swear that you will, in fact, provide information to Stand for Truth so that he can put it up on the video description later on, the links to the places where you claim that the creationists are discussing the Columbia basalt?
No, I didn't say they are, James. I said I imagine they are. Okay, so
you imagine a lot. Yeah.
Okay. So, but I'm not hearing an argument. I'm just hearing, well, you're saying that it can't be accounted for, but I would disagree with you. Yeah, I don't think that uniformitarianism can account for the cataclysmic events of the flood. For example, why there are massive slabs of the Earth's continental material that have been shoved all the way down to the outer core of the Earth in a 3,000 degrees difference in temperature from the material around them.
Which one? Which particular one?
A number of them. Let me finish, please. I want to ask you a question about
that. One of my evolution hours.
I want to ask you a question about that. Can you explain why it's logical to believe that at the rate your fingernails grow or some similar speed, the material can be shoved all the way down, make it all the way down, that's thousands of miles into the inside the Earth, into material that is glowing hot and remain 3,000...
Who said it did? Who said it did?
Let me finish my question.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll start again. The continental crust of the Earth has been shoved very deep into the Earth in a number of places, okay, all the way down to the outer core, where the temperature is beyond 2,000 degrees. It's, in fact, over 3,000. Now, the problem is that those massive slabs of continental material are 3,000 degrees cooler than the material around them. So the question is this: how is it plausible to believe that the materials at roughly the rate your fingernails grow, that's the uniformitarianist idea, roughly, let's triple that just for fun, okay, is going to get shoved all the way down to the outer core of the Earth where the temperature is smoldering hot and remain 3,000 degrees cooler while it's getting, not only while it's being pushed down there.
You got a question mark in there, or are you going to keep on with a clause?
Not only while it's being pushed down in there, but remain that way for many hundreds, even hundreds of millions of years after. Can you explain that difference in temperature with uniformitarianism?
Who says that? What's your source for that?
So I'm not going to start digging for sources, but I'll just put this.
Okay,
to you.
that's another one.
I'll just put it
Will
to this.
you
to
swear
no,
that
James? Let me finish.
You asked me a
you're
question.
asking for a source. I'm going to
answer
describe the source. Okay, you asked for a source. I'm going to describe it. Every uniformitarianist geologist in the world. Okay?
Every single one of them.
Yeah, all of them.
Okay, now let me get my question in on this point, please.
They all acknowledge the temperature is roughly 3,000 degrees.
Will you promise that you will give the source where you're getting your information from to Standing for Truth so he can post it in the video description when at your convenience? You will swear that you will do that?
I'll do that myself. It comes from secular geologists. James.
Yeah, and I'm already familiar with, I think, where you're getting that from. And if you're thinking of Clary, his treatment of it at Institute for Creation Research in Facts, he was misrepresenting the source material. So we'll be anxious to see your sources on that.
Okay, secular geologists discuss the difference in temperature, and and
they have a perfectly fine explanation for it. I discussed it in one of my evolution hours, I think a year or more ago.
You're saying you didn't believe that the temperature was so greatly different unless I provide a source. Now you seem to be on board.
No, they said they had an explanation for why that was the case, because it's the constituents of the material retains heat differentially, and they can see that even from the crystal structure.
Okay, so now are you now saying that you accept that it's true that the difference in temperature is very highly significant?
That they have an explanation for it that is not catastrophic flood geology.
So you seem to have
they have an explanation for it that's perfectly natural. And I found that when I looked up the material, when I read beyond Clary.
Okay, so you seem to have changed your story. I'm just going to put it to you.
No, I didn't change my story. Don't do that now.
I asked you a question, though, and you didn't answer it.
Yeah.
The question was, can you explain to me how it's plausible to believe that continental crust, the massive slabs of continental crust being pushed all the way down to the outer core of the Earth, where the temperature is so very high?
Don't repeat the question over and over again, Neff. I would like you to answer it. I would like you to answer it. Can you explain why it's plausible to believe it's going to remain is great in difference in temperature after hundreds of millions of years? I'll say that if you're referring to the example that Clary gave in the Institute for Creation Research, the facts were wrong in terms of what he was representing the paper, that there was nothing thermodynamically out of order for those particular deposits. So I want to see your example to see if it's different from the one that Clary gave.
Okay, so James, I'm just going to tell you what the facts are around this, okay? I'll say this about the fourth time. The difference in temperature between these massive slabs of material pushed down to the outer core is approximately 3,000 degrees different from the material that surrounds it, okay? That's data that comes from the secular camp. I'm not getting that from the creations. I'm telling you what secular geologists
see the context for that.
So what I'm asking you is, can you provide a plausible explanation for how that material could remain so greatly different in temperature over hundreds of millions of years?
Because of as I recall from the example Clary gave, that he was riffing off of a technical paper, he didn't note the fact that the paper explicitly discussed that the kind of rocks involved in this have a different characteristic as to how they move heat. They hold heat differentially, and that this is not magical or weird or a problem for conventional. Yes, and so that's why we can't resolve this here. I don't know what specific example you're dealing with. I'll have to look up my material from the Clary paper to deal with the example I'm dealing with. We'll have to resolve this in the discussion in the comments section afterwards as the video is put up.
Okay,
Can we agree that we'll have to deal with it later?
You say they hold heat, but the difference, it's not heat they're holding, it's cold. They're remaining cold, not colder. Not cold, but much cooler than the material around them. They're not holding heat, James. They're refusing to accept the heat.
And that, I know that's the position you want to do, but will you agree that we're going to have to be able to get down to what sources we're talking about to find out what all of this is referring to, and we'll deal with it in the comment section after the video.
I'm just going to accept that you can't give me a plausible reason to believe that.
I can't give you an example because I'm not sure whether I don't trust. First of all, I must say I don't trust you to report facts accurately, Neff. So I want to see the primary sources first.
Okay. All right. Well, my information comes from mainstream journals about.
And I'm sure you'll be happy to put it up for us so we can see it.
Okay, so it's very different. You seem to know something about it. You're talking about it.
Yeah, because I did a thing on the one that Clary discussed, and I don't know of any example other than that cold slab thing that he put up a couple of years ago. I don't have my videos and stuff right up a bit, just as you don't.
Okay.
So we're going to want to deal with this later. Standing for Truth, by the way, will you make sure that we both come clean on our source material in the video description later?
We will, yes. We'll make sure.
Okay. So you can't account for that. So, James, if you can't account for that, can you also not account for the fine, distinct boundaries between the various strata of the geologic column and why sedimentology experiments performed in the laboratory for the last 70 years demonstrate that strata form horizontally rapidly right before your eyes, with one strata forming on top of the other at the same time? How is it possible for the strata to be millions of years old and have these fine, distinct boundaries if they weren't formed rapidly, just as the experiments demonstrate?
Name me a specific deposit that you want to investigate, and we can go ahead and do that. But Bertholt's experiments do nothing other than confirm what I pointed out the geologists already know about, are turbidity currents. That's it. They don't explain how it gets to be rock. They don't explain how you get other kinds of deposits. That's why Bertholt isn't all that big of a hot wheel in modern geology. Are you claiming that very many geologists pay much attention to Bertholt?
Okay, James, I've said it again before. The experiments, there have been a number of them performed by Bertholt, are no different and provide no different results from those provided by mainstream uniformitarianist geologists. I showed you a video of Bertholt performing the experiment at the University of Colorado. That's not some Christian Bible thumping school.
And are we going to go around Bertholt all the way through this kind of show?
Well, I don't know.
This is going to be very boring.
You keep bringing him up. I'm just mentioning the fact that for the last 70 years.
You brought him up.
No, you did. I didn't bring up Bertholt.
I didn't mention Bertholt. No, you were the one that put his
I didn't.
up.
I mentioned the fact that for the last 70 years, geologists have been performing hydrology and sedimentology experiments in the laboratories at universities and performed consistently
and I agree.
the very same results all the way to the present. And that's the exact same results that Bertholt provides. So I'm not specifically picking out Bertholt and saying, "Oh, look at Bertholt." I'm telling you.
Are you claiming that those experiments can replicate all different geological forms?
No, nobody believes. They're not experiments in every kind of form. They're experiments in sedimentology. Why would we expect them
in
to
terms of
explain
sediment,
other
are you claiming that those can account for all the different sedimentology examples that we have, like Sicker Point, for example?
No, we're not going to be able to reproduce every geological process that's created the geologic column in the laboratory. Like it'd be difficult to do so. How are you going to reproduce? That's just not a realistic expectation. But I did ask you a question. I asked you, how can you explain the fine, paper-thin, distinct boundaries with an absence of erosion between them with uniformitarian time?
Oh, you can. Platinculk pop up like that all the time. This is in the geological literature. This is not something that's hidden. You, by your own definition, are getting your material from the regular scientific community. So clearly, they're not suppressing any of this stuff. They just don't give it the interpretation that your creationism wants to have on it.
Can you answer? Can you tell us how uniformitarian time is able to produce strata which have paper thin boundaries between them with no erosion?
Which examples are you talking about?
The entire geologic column.
The entire geologic column are all paper thin. There's not a single sign of fracturing. There's not a single sign of changes of bedding. There's not a single sign of cross bedding.
No. That's not true. Of course
Okay,
there
then
is.
why are you saying it as if all of the geologic record
Well,
looks like that? There
let-
is zero of that in Spokane here.
Well, let me explain
So what
why,
happened?
James. I'll explain why.
Why did the
Because-
spigot turn off here?
I'll explain why. Because you're doing what uniformitarianists and evolutionists always do. You pick out an exception and then you attempt to use it to represent the whole.
And you're picking out exceptions, Neff.
in order to rebut an argument. That's not
You're
the
picking
truth,
out
though.
exceptions.
The truth is, probably some 96 or 8% of the entire geologic column is strata, which have fine, paper-thin, distinct boundaries between them. There are different stratas. There's conglomerates. There's sheet flows. I mean, there's mud flows. There's pyroclastic flows. There are exceptions, but in general, the whole geologic column from the surface of the Earth to the Cambrian, Precambrian rock is consists of strata which have fine, distinct boundaries which do not gradiate one into the other. The boundary ends; it's abrupt, flat as a door between almost
And
all the
you
strata
claim
in the
that,
whole
yes.
geologic column.
You claim that. Please,
can
I
you
hope you
explain?
document that with sources too.
Can you explain how these millions of strata can form with fine, distinct boundaries like that over geologic?
Who says there are?
Who says there are what?
Who says there are all these millions of examples when we can't get you to ever provide a primary source on any of them?
Great Scots. Okay, James, are you actually telling me you don't know that the geologic column is predominantly strata which have fine, distinct boundaries between them?
I say in all the geologic papers that I have ever seen, that cartoon that you just imply is exactly what we don't see as a uniform thing.
Can somebody share my screen
in
for
the
me,
geologic
please?
record?
Somebody share my screen for me a second, please.
Oh,
James,
let me
let me
see.
show
Maybe
you.
I can bring up on just this stupid dropstone issue.
Can my screen get shared for me? I want to show James something.
Praise, can you
Yeah,
make sure Neff's screen gets shared there?
He might have stepped away from his computer for a moment.
Okay,
So,
let's take
James,
an
are you really
Miles'
serious?
paper from '85.
Do you really not know that the vast preponderance of strata in the geologic column have these very same features, fine, distinct boundaries one
Where's
upon the
the
other?
where's
like that?
the distinct strata here?
I can't make out that little cartoon from here, James. That's not going to tell me anything.
Okay, I'll give you the reference on
I'm
it.
showing you photographs.
It's Andrew Miles. It's Andrew Miles. Well, yes, and with we could even find out if it's all the source on it. But Andrew Miles' paper from 1985, which, by the way, Michael Ord cited in his paper on dropstones. I've been researching all of this because you brought up dropstones in your debate with Colton. So I was looking up the primary source material on that. He's got stratigraphic charts on here. I'd like to know what exactly you think a fine lamination bed is supposed to look like. When we've got trough cross bedding, ripples, convoluted bedding, dropstones, intraclasts in every single core they were bringing up. Where is the deposit on that?
Okay, so you're doing it again. You're pointing to the exception and attempting to represent the whole geologic column that way. That's wrong.
No, they're not
James.
exceptions.
That's wrong.
They're not exceptions. They're not exceptions.
That's wrong. I'm just going to tell you again, James, that the vast majority of the geologic column is strata which have fine, distinct boundaries between them.
Then cite the technical literature that documents that. Please do so. I look forward for your monograph on this, Neff.
I just hope the audience takes away this fact that they will actually do this. Go to Google or Bing and type in geological strata and start looking at the images going all the way down to the grand
I will say
unconformity and see what James apparently doesn't believe exists. Shocking, James, shocking. I'm shocked.
Oh, you can be shocked as all you like. I'll recommend that every single person, when they see one of those pictures, look up the technical literature that relates to those deposits and look at the stratigraphic material. Look up material on the coring that has been done, which was what this Miles paper was about. And you try to find whether or not it is a common ubiquitous thing that they're fine striation detail material in the manner that Bertholt's experiments were relating to, and you will find those are in fact extremely rare in the geological record, in the same way that well-preserved articulated fossils are relatively rare in the fossil record.
Wow.
Yeah,
James.
wow.
Wow. I can't believe you're saying that. I'm pleased that you did, though,
know,
because it shows.
You can believe I said it. I just said it.
It shows that uniformitarianists are in denial of science or either ignorant about it, James. I mean, James, I'm going to inform you about something. The the vast majority of strata on the Earth going down to the Precambrian rock is strata just like the ones in the photographs I showed.
And so you keep on insisting, and I want to see your technical literature on that. Have you written like a monograph or a paper on all of this claim before?
Wow. I don't need to, James.
No.
This is what every geologist on the Earth knows. I don't know why
have
you don't know
written such an analysis?
No, I don't need to. Every geologist on the planet understands this, James. I don't understand why you don't.
So I am to take your word for it that the geologic column says that when you will not document it with your actual source material so we can check up on it? Yeah, wow.
I don't know what to say, James, really. I just think you just did yourself.
I wouldn't know what to say either.
I think you just did yourself.
Let's look at this one. Interbedded airborne volcanic ash. How do you deal with that in the geologic column?
Well, there were countless volcanic eruptions that took place during the flood.
And how does it get underwater?
Because there was a flood. Because
but how does it look? How does it look like airborne volcanic ash underwater?
Well, that's your false interpretation of the data.
Well, have you ever looked at any geologic?
All we know is we have a layer of ash that's finely compressed in between geologic strata, which have the very features that I described and have shown you photographs.
And other things too?
Well, everything about the geomorphology of the planet bespeaks of the flood, James.
Let me say,
have you examined any?
I did, but I couldn't get it to screen share. I'll try again.
It's one of the reasons why I don't rely on screen sharing, because sometimes that can slow up the computer and make. I wanted
to screen share these sedimentary strata photographs of them that go all the way down to the Cambrian rock, and that James doesn't believe exist. But I was having trouble doing that.
I did see that. Oh, please. So James, I have said that the kind of fine striations that you show as pictures is not at all common in the geologic record, which anybody who has read through lots and lots of geology papers will discover the moment they look at the stratigraphic chart.
How can you account for the strata having fine, distinct boundaries one upon the other with uniformitarian time? How can fine, distinct boundaries with one strata end and then the next one begin abruptly, paper thin, right on top of it, and this be predominant? How can that be explained over vast? How can strata like that be created? James, let me finish my sentence. Let's have a talk. James, let's have a talk. How can such strata be formed over a vast age of time?
I insist that, in fact, if we look at the specific deposits, please write your paper so we can see your sources on it. It won't mean what you claim it means. And I tell you, Neff, we have been trying to get you to document your claims for quite a while. I'm not the only person who has done this. I want to see your examples that you consider the most spectacular cases of this so that we can actually track that down and look at to a new deal. I'm sure Dapper Dino is going to want to do that. I'm sure Colton would want to do that. I'm sure Gutsick Gibbon would be curious to see watching us do all of that. Jackson, every one of them would be fascinated to see this.
James, are there that many in your camp that don't believe that sedimentary strata have these features going all the way down to the basement rock? Can my screen share be shared now, please?
I'll tell you that every geologist who has vetted our work will call what you call pseudoscience.
James, what you're looking at right now is the same thing that goes all the way down to the Precambrian rock. And in fact, it sits, this kind of strata.
And what is that showing us?
This kind of strata with these kind of fine distinct boundaries sit right on top of the great unconformity, in fact. Let me show you some more of them, James.
And what deposit is that? Whoa, back up.
I'm trying to I'm trying
Please.
to hold on. I'm trying to find.
The
Wait,
one you first
this is
put
not
up.
the.
Just stick to
Wait,
that.
James. This is not the right screen share. I want to screen share the right screen. Okay, that's not the screen that I wanted to share.
Okay, when you land on the
Okay.
screen share, let us
Now,
know.
let me try to
And then I'm going to ask you for the source.
let me try to screen share the right slides.
Okay, then we'll ask for your sources on it.
Yeah, you guys always ask for sources about everything. Don't provide any of your own.
Yeah, because that's what science is about.
And I can show you photographs, James. You've done enough damage to your camp.
Photograph is not a source.
James, you've done enough damage to your camp by denying. You've done enough damage to your camp by denying the geologic column doesn't have these fine, distinct boundaries that going all the way down deep into the earth. It's bad enough for you already. Okay, so I'm not able to screen share that now. It takes time for the I don't know.
Well,
so I'm just going to say it again. So I'm going to ask you. I'm just going to ask the question again, or maybe you'll actually try to answer it. How can uniformitarian time explain strata which have fine, distinct boundaries between them and no erosion between them?
As and I will say exactly the same. Are we going to stipulate that you will ask the same question over and over again?
Are you saying strata?
I deny that what you are saying is a valid description of the geologic column,
James,
and that I will want to know your sources, and you won't ever give them, and so we won't be able to fact check it. And the next time you'll come and ask the same question, may we stipulate that took place 1 billion times so we can get to something else?
Okay, so James, let's pretend you didn't deny that this represents the whole geologic column. Let's just pretend that it's just a small part of it, okay? And that some of it is up here and some of it's way down there, okay? The strata are still there. And they still have fine, distinct boundaries.
Rocks are there.
And they don't gradiate from one to the other. I'm asking you how you can account for strata like that with uniformitarian time. Do you have an answer?
You're right back to your mantra. Are you claiming that Sicker Point? Are you claiming that Sicker Point has these finely graded beds?
Did I mention that?
It's one of the most famous geological deposits on Earth.
I didn't mention that. I'm asking.
I know you didn't mention it because
James,
creationists can't account for it.
Let's pretend you didn't deny that the vast majority of strata have this feature going all the way down. Let's just pretend it represents 10% of the geologic column, and some of it is a high and some of it's really low. Okay, let's think about the lower ones for a second. Okay, can you explain to us how those strata, with their fine, distinct boundaries, without gradiating one material into the next, or can be produced over vast geologic time?
Rewording the same sentence. Will you tell me let me put a question in here for you, please. Will you explain to me why most of the sediment on the Earth because of the flood isn't in the ocean bottoms rather than up on the continents?
Well, James, if the flood, if uniformitarianism were true, there should be massive more sediments on the ocean floors than there are. There's only about 12. There's only about 12 million years worth down there. And that's a problem for you.
I want a source on that too. But the thing is, I want to ask you, let us hypothesize that the flood.
Let me finish my statement, crying out loud. Okay. I know you're out here, your worldview is being challenged.
As is yours.
I was just trying to say, I didn't mention that formation, so I think you're kind of straw manning me. But the point of it is that there is only 12 million or so years worth of sediments on the ocean floor. Now, if uniformitarianism were true, there should be hundreds of millions of years worth. Why isn't there?
What source do you have that that's true?
Okay.
Where did you get that piece of information from?
I see what this is going to be. It's going to be every time I discuss something, you're not going to even talk about it unless there's sources. I provide sources.
I want to know your source. Are you terrified of giving a source?
You're not providing any argument for anything, and you're not answering any question.
I know that the amount of material in the oceans, most of which only goes back to the Jurassic. There's a wee tiny slice of the Carboniferous that's in the Eastern Mediterranean. We alluded to that in the rocks were there. The problem for your flood geology is that they have to have an awkward problem. If you take, Glenn Morton pointed this out in an example that he did as an experiment. If you take a bunch of bricks and pile them up in your bathtub and put the water in there and dump a bunch of sediment in, most of it's going to settle at the bottom. That's what sediment does. So the creationists have had a little dark secret that their model should have more sediment on the sea floors than on the land, when it's exactly the opposite. So they've had to do this incredible, weird, hypothetical funhouse to push the land up and down, but they don't even get to that stage. Are you aware of that controversy in flood geology, Neff?
I'm aware that the flood is able to explain the geomorphology of the continents. I understand that the controversy has always existed in the imagination of the evolutionist. Now, James, what you're seeing on the screen...
That's a lie. Are you telling me that there is no controversy in young Earth creationism about the amount of sedimentation in the oceans?
I don't know if there is. I've not heard of one, but I wouldn't take that to mean that that's argument against the flood of Noah.
Maybe I read more creationism than you do.
James,
okay, this is the one I was talking about here. What deposit is that?
This is in Ireland. James, what you're seeing on the screen represents what's found throughout the geologic column. It's very much like...
False, what deposit is it specifically?
It's very much like the flood created it. It's very much like...
What's the name of the deposit?
I don't know the name of the formation.
Why not?
James, please, God help me, man.
Why not?
James,
I know where I get my material from. I'm anxious to share with people where I get my material from.
Trying to show
I want to know, did you get that picture just as a picture, and did you get it from like a creationist website?
I got it from
where did
Santa
you obtain
Claus,
that?
James. Are you happy now? I got it from Santa.
Oh, thank you. Santa Claus is wonderful. I'm glad that you don't claim you got it from a science source.
So now, James, what I'm showing you on the screen is exactly what we see going all the way down to the Cambrian rocks on the Earth throughout the geologic column.
So you keep on insisting.
The sedimentary strata of the Earth have James, please, crying out loud, man. Look, wait, James, let me say a thing. Let me make 2 sentences, and then you can make 2 sentences, James.
Let's do this, guys. Let's let Neff say his few sentences, and then we'll give James plenty of time to respond, equal time.
Yeah. And don't change the image. I want to talk about that one.
James, what I'm trying to help you understand is what you see in this picture is just like what goes on all the way through the whole geologic column. The boundaries between the vast majority of strata in the whole geologic column have these clear, fine, distinct boundaries like this, paper thin in many cases. There's very little blending of one material into another. The vast majority of them have these fine, distinct boundaries. And I've been asking you for 30 minutes if you can explain this kind of strata formation where the boundaries between them are so fine with uniformitarianist geology, with vast ages of time. Can you please answer that question?
Yes, you keep on repeating. Now, let me ask some questions about...
Well, I would appreciate you answer mine before you
I'm delighted to discuss this specific deposit because there's a bunch of questions I have. Pull the image out so we can see the whole image that you had. I want to see the whole thing. I am about to. I need to have the image out.
Well, there it is, James.
So we get back. It's your example that you brought up. You should be happy to present it. Thank you. There we go. Now, we will notice that area where you got the yellow. Okay, now let me ask my questions. You got this yellow box where it says distinct fine boundaries. Is that line from that arrow at that point, does that not turn into not a straight line the moment we get to that part right above the D?
It is a fine boundary between...
Is that a straight line or is that a bump?
It's fine boundaries. I'm trying to answer you, James. James, you want me to answer?
Yeah.
Let me answer. Okay.
Yeah. What's the scale?
It is a fine boundary between one strata and another, just like we see going throughout the entire geologic column.
What's the scale?
Where's the gradation between them?
What does a gradation look like, Neff? How would that look different from what we're seeing here?
Do you know what a gradient is, James?
Yes, you describe it to us.
The strata don't
gradient. Stop moving the image around. Leave the image on. Please keep the image on the screen. Don't jump to your other material. Put the image back up, please.
I want to show you other places.
Leave it on while we're talking about this, please. I don't want to talk about other places. I want to talk about this example you just brought up.
We'll talk about it, but I'm going to show you other places.
Would you mind describing to me? Stop. Don't keep on moving. If everybody in the audience is frustrated at the fact that you won't stay put on your own example, please put the image out so I can talk about that spot up above that box that you put up. Let's talk about that part right there. I want to know what exactly you think a graded version would look like, a non-graded version. God, can't you leave that thing put?
James, do you know what a gradient is?
So explain how it would look different if it weren't gradient. That bump
Great.
that's coming up
Excellent.
above the distinct.
Okay,
How
great.
would that look different?
I'll do that. I'd be happy to do that. I'm so glad you asked without ever answering my question. I'm so glad you asked. Now, if you see, the reason for the difference in color between the stratum is because one material, it predominates one stratum, and the one above it is predominantly another material. That's why there's a difference in color, right? Okay, so the material above here, this has probably got a lot of clay.
That's not the question I asked.
This has probably got a lot of clay in it. That's why it's reddish looking. And this might have a lot of chalk in it. I don't know what that particular stratum is comprised of. But the difference in color between them is because they're predominantly comprised of different materials. That's why they're different in color. All right. So if these materials formed over a vast material of time, imagine erosion is slowly happening by uniformitarian time, slowly building. Materials are being moved into place to become this strata over time. As that one material slowly stops becoming predominant, another material starts moving into that area by erosion also, and it blends with that material over a period of time until the material, let me finish, until the one material is no longer available for deposition and only the new material is available for deposition. If these materials were deposited over geologic time, spans of time, big time spans, many thousands, tens of thousands even of years, then they would gradiate one material into another, just like a gradient. Okay, but the fact that they have this fine distinct boundary says this, James. Says this. Hold on, it says this.
That, but I don't see
James, what it says is
that wouldn't happen at all.
What it says is the material on the bottom strata that's a brighter color, it is no longer available for deposition anymore, and only the material above it now is. Right? That's what has happened to create this strata. Now, that is the question. How does that happen?
And what about that big rock down there in that little rock that's sticking up there? That rock that's sticking up there to the left and below your yellow paragraph. See that rock that's sticking up into the frame?
This rock here?
How did that happen?
Well, it might have been a drop stone that's broken, for all I know.
Yeah. How did that happen?
Might be a drop stone. But the question is, James,
what deposit is this, by the way?
The question
it doesn't matter?
No, the question is, how does a fine distinct boundary like this happen over a vast age of time? Because laboratory experiments...
And how do you keep asking the same question over again?
James, laboratory experiments...
wanting to discuss the example you just brought up. So you're telling me...
I am discussing it.
You're telling me that you don't know where this is.
I don't need to know where it is.
You don't... Let me put in a sentence here. Can I put in a sentence, please? Without interruption? Yeah, you don't need to know what it is because your zoology is completely devoid of specificity. You are a secondary source addict that gets examples from various creationist websites, which if we could see your source base, we could just find that out. I don't think you've ever done any primary source original research in your life, Neff.
James, I'm just showing you, I don't need to know where the location is. I'm just showing you what represents the geologic column, okay? And I'm asking you,
of course you don't,
how it's possible
it doesn't matter
for
to
the
you.
strata.
And whenever I bring up examples that don't fit your model, you say they're irrelevant and unimportant because you only have the examples you do. How big of the Earth? How many examples have you shown? Have you shown us 1 million of those?
James, I'm just going to say it again.
Have you?
What you're seeing on the screen represents the geologic column going down to the bottom of the bottom of it.
So you insist.
That's a geological fact, James.
And I would contend that every single one of those examples has a perfectly normal, standard geological interpretation and
that's what I'm asking.
And if you ever got to the point of where you would actually connect a specific, those lithified things are probably seabeds for some of those, because they tend to form flat material like that. The other example that you put up that you wouldn't identify where it is, the one with the rocks, that's probably a very different environment. And whether we're shifting from aeolian to waterborne environments will depend on, to see the details of it and the technical literature, which we can't find out because you never tell us where anything is.
Okay, so you can't answer the question. You say there's a perfectly good uniformitarian explanation for it. But
I won't give you the answer you want to have.
You don't
That's
know the
correct.
answer. You don't know how strata would find
I know
boundaries.
that
You don't,
every
James,
single
you don't
instance
know.
when I have looked
You
up
don't know how
relation-
fine, distinct boundaries between strata can be accomplished by over a vast age of time. Is that what you're telling me?
mantra.
You don't know the answer.
Oh, Jungle Jargon asked Downard what the volume of the sediment layers is. Why is that important, Jungle? That's another mantra quote.
Okay,
Anyway,
so I accept that
we're
you
probably
don't know.
going to be going on along like this. How far are we into the discussion, Standing?
I
I haven't been keeping track.
I have we've got exactly 15 minutes. Depending on how you guys want to spend your last 15 minutes, we did have a...
I'd rather go to Q&A.
Well, James, I'd like to ask you one more question, if you don't mind.
I did have a suggestion. I wonder what you guys think of
one
this.
more question.
Real quick. I'm not sure what you guys think of this, but Salvador in the chat recommends it would be more productive to talk specific, well-identified strata next time. Would that be something you guys want to discuss for the last 15 minutes? Or if Neff has
good
a question,
idea.
or if Neff wants to ask a specific, or we can do just Neff asks a specific question. You take as much time as you need to answer it. You can ask Neff a specific question in equal time. I mean, we got 15 minutes. However else you guys want to spend it, go ahead.
Okay, so James, you believe, like secular geologists,
I would find it very useful
that you wanted to talk about a specific one. Let me say, I don't need to know where any of those are. All I need to show is that the strata of the Earth, regardless of where they're found, that's the predominant features of it. But here's a specific example, okay? This is the Coconino Sandstone at the Grand Canyon. Okay, your camp claims these materials were deposited by aeolian process, that's wind blown, over millions of years. Can you explain how you can get a parabolic recumbent fold in aeolian sediments? Because we know water can do it. Can you explain how wind can create a parabolic recumbent fold in sand?
Oh, well, I'll have to defer to Karlstrom or some of the other people that have written on the Coconino Sandstone. By the way, do you have any geological documentation that such recumbent folds can't form in an aeolian context?
Well, let's just, talk about that for a second. You see, do you know what a recumbent fold is? You see the material folds back down over itself, okay? This is okay. When for example, in Japan, when the tsunami hit Japan, mud flows flowed across the landscape in Japan, and they had the leading edge of that material looks just like what you see in this photograph, because it was thick with sediments, water, literally chock full of sediments, very thick, sluey, soupy, very soupy. Okay, and that's why it folds over on itself like that. Okay, if wind blows,
what evidence do you have that deposit was deposited in the orientation it is now?
James, when wind blows sand, it lays it flat on top of other sand, right? It doesn't create parabolic recumbent folds. That's not possible by wind blown aeolian process. You cannot get
what evidence do you have that deposit was laid in the orientation it is now?
Well, there it is. It's
what evidence do you have that it was laid in the orientation it has now?
Because there it is. It's concreted into stone.
You do understand the geometric circumstance.
It's concreted into stone.
Are we looking down on a deposit? Let me finish the sentence. Are we looking down on a deposit that when it was laid was flat? It wasn't raised up as a curve. We're looking at the top edges of dunes, looking at the bottom, and it's been tilted up to the orientation that we have now. Have you investigated whether that's what we're actually looking at?
Okay, so James, look at the bottom of the picture here. you'll see that the strata at the bottom on top of which it's sitting are horizontal, in congruence with the law of horizontality in geology. When strata are deposited, they're all deposited flat and horizontal. They can become twisted or tilted afterward by geologic processes in the continent. Pressure in the continent
like Sicker Point.
Can twist them. Okay, right. But the problem here is that this material, here's another parabolic recumbent fold in the Coconino, is that parabolic recumbent folds don't happen in dry sand. It can only happen
and
if
so
there's
you
water
keep on
there.
insisting. I hope we'll find out some technical literature that documents that. Or are you merely repeating what creationists say?
So, James, you're telling us that you believe it's possible to get a parabolic recumbent fold by wind-blown sand? That wind-blown sand doesn't slowly build upwards on top of other sand in a flat sort of way? They can actually create these curves, round and fold back onto itself as the wind deposits it? Are you really saying that?
I need to look at the specific deposits to see what the heck is going on. You are always just picture person, and that's all that matters on it. It's because it's seen in a picture where you've got from who knows where. I don't argue that the geology isn't there. I know that when I look at Andrew Snelling, Ord, and all the rest, when they tried to discuss specific deposits and offer specific source material, now I can start tracking down what the details and the facts are. And so with you, all we are getting is pictures. And I don't think I'll be gobsmacked if you ever offer documentation, even for the points that we've already asked for.
Okay, so James, here's what I suggest you do. I suggest you go to a geology glossary, pick your favorite university that publishes one, and look up recumbent fold and see what they say.
And I'll be doing that indeed.
Yeah. Because they're a real deal.
And I bet I'll get to the data field before you get to documenting.
They're a real thing, you know. You're looking at a picture of a recumbent fold. And,
not arguing.
You're telling us
the question is,
that can be folded
I
by
can't
wind.
assume that anything you say is going to be valid. By the way, everybody in the watching feed, don't take either one of our words for any of this stuff. Go and look it up for yourself. Fact check on your own. Don't take our word for it. You shouldn't have to.
This is more of the this is the Navajo Sandstone, James. We see an unconformity here, lamina, that have been tilted by geologic process, and then an unconformity right on top of it, where the moist sediments literally were ripped away by new sediments.
Yeah, and how did that get to be rock in that way?
Because sand turns into stone.
How long did that take to get to be rock, Neff?
Probably no less than weeks or months, no more than 1 month.
So why can't we replicate that in the lab?
I don't know that it hasn't been replicated in the lab, but I know this. Sandstone is formed in water because the minerals that are in the water act as glue to glue the grains of sand together. That's how you get sandstone. It is formed in water.
Are there any forams in that deposit?
Any what? I'm sorry?
Foraminifera? Are there any foraminifera in that deposit?
I don't know. I doubt it.
Why would you doubt it?
Because sandstone doesn't yield a lot of fossils. Fossils are found in sandstone.
Forams they do.
But not a whole lot of,
the pyramids are built out of it.
So
pyramids are chock-a-block with forams from their limestone.
You don't really believe that these were created by wind with this unconformity here, right? Do you?
I'll have to. I don't know. I'll have to look at the deposit because you've got something that's in betwixt something else. It's an interesting deposit. It looks fascinating. I'm sure it has a fascinating geology, and I'm sure creationists won't have done much work on it that will explain it other than just look at the picture.
Well, you see that fine distinct boundary again.
In this flood that you claim, how widely distributed were foraminifera in the Paleozoic, in the pre-flood ocean?
Well, the geologic column is explained by the Noahic flood. It's the only possible explanation. So all fossils are a product of the, almost all fossils are a product of the Noahic flood. Not the question I asked.
How widely distributed were foraminifera during the flood?
I don't know exactly, but probably the geologic column shows us that life forms were quite diverse and quite well distributed across the earth prior to the flood.
Okay.
Don't you agree?
Yeah, and why do they end up in the deposition frameworks that they do?
Well, I know you have your ideas about the geologic column
wanna know
and the
your
fossils
ideas,
therein, but what I would suggest you look up are disharmonious fossils, because there's lots of them, and they argue against, well, pollen, for example. Evolutionists claim flowering plants didn't evolve until after the dinosaurs went extinct, and then they find pollen fossils. James, please don't constantly talk over me, James.
Okay, well, I'll wait for you to get to it. Tell me, say period after you're done.
So fossil pollen has been found in the geologic column alongside dinosaur digs. All right, so we know that that was wrong, and we know that evolutionists always have to modify their theory to take into account disharmonious fossils. They do it all the time, like every 10 years or less. You know, oh, this creature existed before we thought it did. What do you know? That's what creationists have been telling you all along.
Name me some paleontologist that would be shocked to learn that pollen from angiosperms wouldn't be around at the time of dinosaurs.
Well, at the time of the Cretaceous,
tell me a paleontologist who thinks that.
Well, every one of them that lived in 1950 or 60.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, all of them.
Yeah, I'll like to see your documentation on that one too.
Just like they said,
knowing that flowering plants date back to the dinosaurs, and they've known that for quite a long time.
Well, just like when they find a beaver fossil, they say, "Gee, this creature looks awfully like a beaver. Looks like beaver-like creatures existed with dinosaurs, after all." But they've been telling us.
You're not. Oh, I know you. I know that one. You're cribbing from creationist apologetics, Neff.
Your camp is always having to update their theory, but with what you would call a disharmony.
No, not really. So anyway, back to the sea creatures in there. So where exactly did plesiosaurs live compared to where ambulocetids did?
Well, they would have lived in the ocean.
Yeah, but all in the same. They can't swim around next to one another ever.
Well, they swim around. Well, James, how come we don't find a lot of some species of dinosaur in the same strata as other species, but they're claimed to? We know they coexisted, or at least
because they didn't all live at the same time. For the same reason that I don't find a Model T Ford part.
The same question comes back at you.
In deposits in 1820.
The same question comes back at you. There's lots of creatures in the fossil record that we are not found alongside another or in the same strata for 50 or 100 miles, and yet they're said to have coexisted. So your argument about the fossil record, it doesn't wash. The evolutionist camp is always having to update their theory.
We're talking about marine creatures, not land creatures. That's a different dynamic. You admit that, right?
Creationists don't have to update their theory to take into account any fossils.
Yes, they do. They've constantly modified.
Evolutionists do it constantly, and they've been doing it for 150 years.
Are you claiming to me that creationists don't evolve their models to get over obstacles and to ad hoc their way around problems?
Not really, no.
Are you claiming that all creationists from the 1960s on accepted plate tectonics?
Well, that's like asking, did all evolutionist scientists acknowledge that Coelacanth was coexisting with these creatures for all the 70 million years, 65 that's missing from the geologic column?
You want to discuss coelacanths?
Kind of question.
You want to discuss coelacanths?
That's the same kind of question, you know?
Well, do you want to discuss coelacanths?
It's not an argument for anything. It's a disharmonious fossil. Just like hundreds of them.
Why is it disharmonious?
Because it's absent from the... Okay, I'll answer. You want me to answer?
Okay, what's the habitat for coelacanths?
Because it's missing from the geologic column for 65 million years, and we know it lived.
What's the habitat for late Cretaceous coelacanths?
Well, that would be in the oceans where it exists today.
Deep
Why
ocean,
do you find
right?
a fossil of it on a continent, though, without a flood?
Because the land that used to be underwater is now fossilized and then pushed up. That's where virtually all fossils that are found are.
You're becoming a creationist.
Excellent. No. By the way, let's talk about coelacanths. Right. What's the immune system of coelacanths and what it tells us about the development of vertebrate immune systems?
I don't think you're going to be able to tell us enough about the immune system to, I mean, you're going to be able to make an assumption out of that, James. Go try if you want.
Oh,
There's
well,
about 1
actually,
minute,
there's some
guys.
wonderful technical literature on it. Are we out of time from that?
The clock says 1 minute. We could
Yay,
jump
can we get to questions?
What we'll do, guys, really good discussion, very engaging, fast-paced. Let's jump into, so I guess because James started, let's give you a couple minutes just to sum up your thoughts of the discussion. If you want to wrap up anything that you feel like is a loose end, and then we'll give Neff equal time, and then we're going to go into the question and answer. John, he's gathered a ton of questions, so he's going to take care of those. We can always allow a little back and forth in the Q&A, but he'll have to stop it just to give us enough time to ask all the questions. So James, take it away.
Oh, I'll be really short and sweet. Don't take our word for it. Fact check, look up material, look up the source material, try to track down where those images are from and find out where he might have been getting his source material from. Look up the material that I've discussed, the issues that I've raised, and anybody that wants to fire me questions about source base and our material so I can actually sit down and track through my material, do it. You're
Awesome.
ball in your court, Neff.
Neff, it's all yours. Final thoughts?
Okay. Yeah. Final thought is what I've heard James not do is be able to give an explanation for this geologic column with uniformitarianism, avoid that terribly for a very long time. And I also, it seems that James is unaware or in denial, I don't know which, of the fact that the strata in the photographs that I showed you are very much representative of the strata that we find going all the way down to the Cambrian. Precambrian rock, Cambrian rock. The whole geologic column basically looks like that, with the exception, of course, of massive intrusions, massive formations of a single material that intermittently dot the geologic column. For the vast majority of the geologic column, looks nearly identical to the photographs that I showed you. And James seems either unaware of that or in denial of it. If he's in denial of it, I think that's typical of an evolutionist. Deny science to hold on to the uniformitarian millions of years. And that's the end of my conclusion.
I appreciate it there, Neff. So I guess we're going to hand it over to John. John, thanks so much for, I know the audience was fast-paced, lots of good questions, so I'll hand it over to you. If you have all the questions, we can get started on that.
All right. Well, great debate, guys. And yeah, we got a bunch of awesome questions. I'm over here on the Google Doc. If anything else comes into the chat, can you grab those while I'm looking at these?
Yep. I'll be watching the chat.
All right. So the first question is from Ray Vincent, and it is for James. Have you seen Noah's Ark located in Turkey that the Turkish government recognized as the Ark, in all caps? They have also found wood, steel pins, did sonar, I guess they're talking about sonar imaging, and all that. What are your thoughts?
Oh, that's a delicious issue. All you have to do is to keep close tabs on the Institute for Creation Research and Answers in Genesis, how really not convinced of any of that stuff they are. They look at this at arm's length. No, everybody's almost, well, it's about every 5 years or so, somebody comes up with an argument that there's been the Ark found, and it's really sad. So I would ask the guy to do some source checking about where they're getting their material from, and read outside of that. Read a lot of different creationists, and you'll find out, no, nobody uniformly jumping on any of that stuff. And from my point of view, there was no Ark, there was no flood, so they're not going to find anything ever. You have any comments, Neff?
Yeah, I don't believe that formation is the Ark of Noah. I think what little it must remain of it, I believe that Noah and his family would have scrapped it for building material after the flood, and so very little of it would have survived. Historians, ancient historians, recount that the Ark was pilgrimaged by millions of, not millions, but many people made pilgrimages to it and took away pieces of it to make amulets and good luck charms. And so it was widely known to exist on the earth in ancient times, right on up to the early Middle Ages. But I don't believe that if they ever find the Ark, they'll only find what's left of it, and it won't probably be too much.
Oh, I'll just put in one addendum on that. The location of the Ark as Mount Ararat, Agradagi, in Turkey only dates to like about the 1200s. And so there is no long tradition about this stuff. It has accumulation in the same way. That was in the relic period when they were finding pieces of the true cross all over the place. That was a shall we say, credulous time.
No. The ancient historians wrote that of the flood of Noah, that the Ark of Noah existed in their time. And
documentation, please.
Such as Chrysostom Isidora of Seville, going back Berosus, the famous Assyrian historian, Mantheo, who lived 300 BC, Hermannus, the Egyptian, who wrote the Phoenician Antiquities, Josephus, and those later. The ones that are ancient are Berosus, the Chaldean, and in the 3rd century AD, and Mantheo also in the 3rd century AD, they wrote of these things. And Hermannus.
I think it's Manetho, isn't it? Anyway.
Manetho, and also Hermannus, I think, Egyptian, Damascus, 1st century, I think. Anyway, so since at least 300 BC, we've got historical legends of these pilgrimages to the Ark.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That was a great little back and forth there. Awesome question. All right, next one up is from George Bond, and this one is also for James. Micritic carbonate layer at the Grand Canyon is approximately 12 feet thick. According to secular science, this deposit is at 6 inches a year. Why do we find nautiloids buried in the standing position in this layer?
Ooh, the nautiloid example, that comes from Steve Austin, and it's not as he describes it. He implies that all those nautiloids are in the same orientation, which they're not.
No, he doesn't.
And of course, that's another one of where the rocks have gotten tilted. So yeah, look, you can look that example up. You could probably Google Steve Austin nautiloids, and you can probably find stuff. I think Joel Duff did some material on it, or maybe also, oh gosh, I've forgotten the name of the fellow that has done an awful lot of postings on this. But anyway, yeah, you can find out. So the nautiloid example is not as Austin made out. Short form.
It's exactly as he made out. He's the discoverer of it. Mainstream scientists have studied it and found that the position of the nautiloids in that massive strata that runs the entire length, 250 miles of the Grand Canyon, are in various positions. Many of them are in a vertical position, and many
Which
of them
mainstream
are
scientist would that
also
be?
stream oriented. So your statement that Austin represents them as all being stream oriented, lying flat, is not true.
Which mainstream scientist are you referring to, Neff?
Okay, we're going to do that again. Right?
All right. So
yeah, I know. I love. I mean, you banged me about
guys,
generics. I'd love to know,
guys. We have a bunch of questions to get through. So, real quick,
okay.
Awesome super chat from Mitchell, and it was a fist bump. So, thank you, Mitchell, for your super chat. And this is another super chat for Neff. And I'm probably going to butcher this name, but it's from Sigifredo Sarabia. Neff, what about a rock spire or single tall rocks in places not surrounded by the rocks, or Tanzi Mountains in China with hills? How did these happen?
Well, in the same way that the formations found in the American Southwest formed, at the end of the Noahic flood, the waters receded from the continents in sheets. This was what created planation surfaces on the continents, massive areas, thousands of square miles, which are just sheared flat by rapidly moving water. And they eroded a lot of stuff. So some of them are the product of that process. Others are the product of massive local floods that took place after the flood of Noah, because the flood of Noah left literally millions of brim-filled lakes on the earth, some of them truly ginormous. And when they gushed across the continent, as took place in the American Southwest. They leave these massive columns of material, some of which are intrusions, volcanic intrusions that have come up through the sedimentary strata. The interesting thing about that is for them to form that column, to be so tightly packed with sedimentary strata around them, they had to have come up through moist sediments that could not have already been solid rock, or you wouldn't have had a nice round column of rock going up through the strata. It would have literally exploded and made all kinds of chaos. But since it's a nice smooth column of material going up through all these strata and protruding into the sky, we know that it protruded through that geologic column in that area was still moist sediments like clay, like moist Play-Doh at the end of the flood for that to have happened. So that had to have happened very shortly after the flood of Noah.
And I urge Nephilim to write his technical paper and present that even to the creationist journals. And when that gets printed,
All right,
we
going
will
on
be
to the next
delighted to read it.
question. This one
They
is
speak
for,
of it, James.
Going on to the next question. This one is from Dressel Drace. This is for RJ. How does an altruistic ethic evolve from a Darwinian process? Please don't give me
way off topic.
Hang on.
For one thing,
the question is not over yet, James. Please don't give me
there's a clause.
examples of reciprocity in your answer. Reciprocity is not sacrifice.
Oh, yeah, he was putting up that they've been trying to get a sidetrack on that. That's actually a gigantic subject, the development of morality and ethics from a natural evolutionary framework and how our brains are designed or evolved, however you want to look at it, to evaluate moral questions on this. That's a really big topic that I'm not going to be able to answer in a short period of time. We should probably do a whole discussion on that at some point. I bet
Sounds good. All right.
Erica
So
would be delighted. So I have to punt on that one. That's off topic.
My response would be to that evolution is not capable, deals with what's beneficial and not beneficial, not with what's morally correct or incorrect. That's a category error. So even the famous evolutionist uniformitarianist Charles Lyell wrote that he could not account for the existence of morality with his evolutionism, and it bothered him.
Yeah. Oh, and Lyell, by the way, was a Southern sympathizer in England. He thought the slaveholding society in there was quite nice, and he was a Christian believer. So that's part of the viewpoints that he had. He had also trouble even imagining pre-humans, and so he was having trouble even as Neanderthals came along. He wrote a book about that later on. But anyway,
he's
all right, guys. You're right. This is a secondary debate, so let's move on to the next question. All right. And speaking of the lovely, friendly, and very great debater, Erica, also known as Gutsick Gibbon. This one's for Neff. What is your explanation for thick limestone deposits found underneath coarse materials? Limestone requires calm, warm waters to deposit, and even then it is slow. To specify, I am aware of flume experiments, but they work with mudstone, which is vastly unique from calcium carbonate limestone.
Well, I would say the flood of Noah explains it. It has a fine, distinct boundary between the materials above and below it, which verifies it was deposited rapidly. It can't have been It can't have been deposited over a vast period of time because the materials of the limestone would gradiate into the materials above and below it, and they don't. They have a strong, clear, distinct boundaries, the limestone, with other formations that they rest upon, and that demonstrates it was formed rapidly. So only the flood of Noah can explain the limestone formation. And for the uniformitarianist, try explaining limestone. Try explaining dinosaur fossils and crustacean fossils in limestone and chalk. That's a problem for your camp, but it can be explained by the flood of Noah.
One thing they don't tend to show up in that. I will take note that you should follow up on the whole deposition process. You still have to get it to be rock, and that's the difficulty. My favorite examples that are physically impossible to form in a gigantic flood are plattenkalks, the Solnhofen in the Jurassic limestone that the Archaeopteryxes and stuff come from. That's a plattenkalk it requires absolutely super duper still anoxic conditions. That's just inexplicably preposterous from a flood model.
Yeah.
All right, so All right, so going on to the next question. This one is from Dapper Dino, and it's for James. How does mainstream geology exclude catastrophic events? Why or why not?
Oh, well, as we know, it didn't exclude that. The notion that everything has to be slow and boring. No, we have asteroid impacts. You have gigantic landslides. You got all sorts of volcanic eruptions that go on. The Deccan traps and all of these that are just disastrous from the ecosystems that they're in. But they're still natural phenomenon, and they're measurable phenomenon, and they leave very distinctive traces in the geologic record. It's odd that in so many of these cases, a lot of the creationist literature is very evasive about how they deal with it, because the one thing they can't have is normal scale natural cataclysms accounting for these things. They have to have it all the big slosh. So that's the issue, is that a lot of the arguments that are being made by the creationists are aimed at the geology that they parsed back decades ago, and they're not dealing with the current stuff. Neff, what do you have to say?
Well, I say that that uniformitarianists can't explain the preponderance of the whole geo. They can't explain the geologic column, and because of reasons I've already given, and lots more we don't have time for. But cataclysmic events can be seen throughout the geologic column, like lava flows or ash layers that are volcanic activity which took place under the waters of the flood while it was occurring. And that's why we have ash with a fine ash layer with a fine distinct boundary between the material above and below it, which you can't account for with uniformitarianism.
Thanks for those great answers, guys. Next up, and this is for both of you, from Caustic Soda. Mars catastrophic flow channels are evidence for flood on a planet without water. How can we look at Earth, which is 71% water, with smaller canyons and infer no flood?
Oh, you want to go first or me?
I'll just point out that it's a kind of a mystery where the water went that created the laminations and whatnot on Mars. Some scientists are believing that maybe the water is subducted inside the planet. Maybe an event happened that blew it off or burned it off the planet in space. Nobody has a definitive answer for it.
Yeah, well, actually, the scientists are going way more now that we've landed more probes on Mars. The particular example there is, in fact, a waterborne disaster. It was not unlike the Missoula floods, where an impediment to a lake breaks open and it runs downstream. And it does exactly what we see in the channeled scablands where I live. Straight-walled canyons blasting down through the bedrock until it runs out into its bottom area. It doesn't form incised canyon structures. That's what we see in things like the Grand Canyon. In fact, Jackson and I did a whole section in the rocks where they're about the incised canyon issue and how creationists have tap danced around the formation of incised canyons, including the Nile back during the Messinian salinity crisis.
Awesome, guys. All right, next up, we've got an awesome question from Hunter Rothman. This one is for you, James. Can you give a general explanation for why strata layers can have borders that are paper thin?
Well, when you think about when you already have an existing rock, how can it avoid not burrowing down to it and grinding it down? Glaciers can physically come through and make it as flat as a pancake over areas. So the idea that you're going to have an inevitably bumpy interactive thing depends on the hardness of the rock. So you can find bits of a landscape, and there will be sections of it that are other kinds of rock that have a differential in terms of how rough they are. That's why you have these columns in Bryce Canyon, which Neff put a picture of. I've been there to see the thing. That's a rock that has a different as to how tough the rock is. That's where the erosion factor comes in. So if you have something that's a relatively hard item on top of a relatively light one, it's going to erode differently that way. The examples that he gives, if you have you can find the geology indicates what kind of formations you can get into if it's a tidal estuary versus a riverbed versus aeolian deposits. I know he doesn't like the coconino, or for that matter, the stuff in Mongolia that the velociraptors were in as desert environments, but their mythology doesn't allow that to be true. But yeah, look and check out any of the geological material on this, of which I must point out the vast majority of it's available online these days. So you don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to take Neff's word for it if he ever gives a source, because you can look up the original material. Do that. Follow up research on your own on it. It's an exciting, fun area, and you'll see how the regular geological literature has a level of detail and continuity that none of the cartoon version in creationism is ever going to match. All in your court, Neff.
I'm sorry, distracted. Somebody sent me email pictures.
That's okay, Neff. We'll move on to the next question. We got a bunch to get to.
Sure.
Let's see here. This is from Call Me Emo, and it's for you, Neff. How long does it take for a typical subducted crust to increase in temperature by 1 degree centigrade? And how much would it increase by in 4,500 years?
Well, I don't know, but that's not very thick. I think it would heat up extremely rapidly. I don't see how it could possibly take geologic ages of time. Materials that thin.
Awesome.
Yeah, here we got huge problems with heat. Heat is a bugbear of all creationist arguments, because some of these processes would generate enormous heat and others don't have enough time to fiddle with it. There are a lot of different crystal forms that require very specific circumstances, particular pressures, particular depths, particular temperature differentials, amount of time for it to crystallize. It can be quick in like 100,000 years, but that's longer than the universe. And I can tell you that the creationist literature avoids those topics like the plague.
All right, thanks, guys. All right, next question is from Praise Fist Bump. I need to get one of those voice moderators when I say his name next time.
Praise the Lord. Get some tone into it, kid.
All right, this one is for you, James. Do you deny past superfloods like the Missoula? And if not, how do you determine the difference between them?
Holy moly, were you asleep in the show? I started off with it. I lived there. Yeah, we had dozens of mega floods in here, and I attend the various conferences that are done by the geologists here. Some of them are in bars, and some of them are in colleges. They're an interesting bunch, and you get coffee talk at great technical level in those little things. So yeah, there's been multiple floods. They don't show the kinds of organisms deposited that you would expect if like a giant oceanic flood were involved, because there are virtually no fossils that occur from that, because these glacial lakes don't have a lot of life forms in them, because they form relatively rapidly. The ice dams break, they flood downstream, so basically they're just carrying gravel. Again, there is no discussion other than, gosh, it's a catastrophe. Imagine what a big catastrophe would do. The actual details of the Missoula flood do not match any big slosh model, period. Neff,
yeah, I would just say nobody thinks they do. It's not something that took place during the flood, James. Are you seriously thinking that creationists think that the Missoula flood took place during the flood of Noah? It's an after the flood.
Some of them, there's no agreement about the flood model. They can't agree on what
James,
is before, during, or after the flood.
Creationists don't think that flood took place during the Noahic flood, man. It's something that happened after the flood.
Some do, some don't. There's
no
a very small
geologist
literature
who's a creationist.
Anyway, let's get to the other
that,
question.
James.
I'm trying to answer somebody.
Nobody believes that. Where do you get this?
Stop telling me what other creationists believe when you don't necessarily know.
No creationist believes that, James.
All right, next question, guys. This one is from Alien Mills Row. Does Neff have arguments for creationism, or is he simply arguing for an agnostic perspective, or rather against evolution?
I have so much evidence for creation that if I was to just sit and talk about it in a casual way, it would take me a couple of hours to explain all of it.
Gotcha. All right, next question. This one's for you, James. Jamie Russell says, How do vertical whale fossils exist in the chalk beds?
Oh, that's the Lompoc whale. We discussed that. The rocks were there. Even Snelling acknowledges that it's not a vertical whale. He's well aware of that. That's one of the canards that's been circulating in creationism for years. Yeah, Jackson is probably in hysteria in there because we went into that in the rocks were there. It's not what you think it is. Check up on that, Buckaroo.
All right. So,
I don't have a response for that because I don't know what he's talking about.
all right.
The Lompoc whale. I'll type the name of it in there. Everybody can look it up.
All right. Another great question from Erica, also known as Gutsick Gibbon. This is for both of you. I found a nice paper that suggests the Coconina fold is a feature of meteor crater. Thoughts?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I'll want to be looking into that, little Barry. In other words, the idea that impact events could theoretically produce some kind of folded material. I'm not sure. They've advanced an awful lot on modeling of impact events. Barringer crater, a meteor crater, as it's also called down in Arizona. I'll have to beg off. I'm not familiar enough with that example, but yeah, if you've got that technical paper, I'm going to want to see that.
My response to that is that's absurd to believe that sandstone is going to bend into chevron or parabolic recumbent folds because of impact. That's just nonsense. Parabolic recumbent folds are throughout the geologic column. They're even in mountains. They're all over in the geologic column, especially in the upper geologic column. And none of those were produced. They're even in mountains. So the explanation for them can't be an impact.
Gotcha. All right. So we're going to do a couple more questions and we'll be wrapping things up. This is another one from Dapper Dinos for you, Neff. How could the flood layer be the great unconformity when that's by definition not a layer?
Well, the great unconformity is the division between basement rock and the beginning of the sedimentary strata that make up the geologic column. I don't know that that's the beginning of the flood layer or not. People fail to understand that the Bible tells us that the continents rose out of the oceans before God put any life on them. Now, if that's true, there's going to be sheet flow, water flowing off the continents before there was even a sedimentary strata created by the flood of Noah. So there should be, at the very least, some lamination going on before God put a single organism on the planet. So I think finding the flood layer, as uniformitarians like to label it, is tricky, and that's not a problem for the creationists.
Oh, the great unconformity, for one thing, isn't a single blob. And in fact, the edges of it start blending in farther down the line. Karlstrom did a paper in 2012 on it. We're going to be citing it in volume 2 when we're going into more on the Grand Canyon. That goes into the great unconformity as actually many unconformities. So the geology of it is, again, more complicated than the cartoon version that Neff gets from his creationist pictures.
They're not creationist pictures, James. They're just pictures.
From creationist websites.
No, they're not. No.
Well, you never documented, so we never know. Anyway,
no,
question next.
They're not from creationist websites, James.
All right, that pretty much wraps it up. We're going to have one more question, and then we will go into wrap up and let you guys...
Killed an evening, didn't we?
Closing statements, anything you want to say before we wrap up? But last question... This is another one from Erica, also known as Gutsick Gibbon. As for you, Neff, how do you deal with the immense heat release of a global flood? For example, plate movement, accelerated decay, sediment hardening.
Well, I'm surprised you say accelerated decay because uniformitarianists deny that there could have been, there could have been accelerated decay. But I don't see it as a problem because the oceans are coolant. Maybe she should think about how all the ocean's waters tend to act as a coolant, just like the fluid in the radiator of your automobile. So evolutionists imagined that the flood of Noah would have generated some unfathomable amount of energy, heat, on the surface of the earth, but they've never explained exactly why we know that must be so. But the problem that they really have is they can't explain the massive subduction that has taken place in the earth with uniformitarianism.
I'll just point out that
Go ahead,
that
James.
heat issue. Got to grab the phone there. I definitely want to say something about heat.
Yeah, go ahead. Finish your sentence, James. Finish your sentence.
The heat issue is not a trivial issue, and the creationist literature is chock-a-block with instances of head scratching over the thing, as you have people talking about both accelerated radioactive decay, which is why an awful lot of creationists dump on it in their literature. And the problem is that the oceans aren't nearly enough. We're talking temperatures that would have vaporized the planet. It's just absolutely appalling. And it's just a mess. And this is independent of the regular geological community noting this stuff. This is within the in-house stuff. You look at Institute for Creation Research, Acts and Facts. If you look at Answers in Genesis, there are various back and forths on these little matters. Though heat is a terrible problem on them. They don't have a resolution for this at all.
Yeah, I would kind of disagree with that, since you can't explain the whole geologic column without a global catastrophe, and you can't answer a question about how strata like that formed.
I'm going to jump in real quick. I had to step away for a second. John, did we get to a couple super chats came in just recently? One from Mitchell, thanks for the super chat, and another one from Caleb, who had a question. His question was, where did all this water come from? Did you ask that one yet? I can't remember.
No, I don't think not that super chat. No, I got the one from Mitchell.
Perfect. Okay. I guess this will be the last question then. He says to both. So where did all this water come from? We can start with James, and then we'll go to Neff.
Oh, well, I can, from what I've read from the creationist literature, they have a variety of models that have somewhat modified over time. So some of them were thinking that it was just the waters of the deep squishing up, and the hydroplate model deals with that. You've also got outliers like Kent Hovind, who think about a cometary impact coming in, bringing ice, the Hovind theory, which is kind of warmed over ice canopy. There's all sorts of models. The general point is that they pretty much agree that they've got to end up with the amount of water that we have in the present oceans after all the sloshing is done. The problem is how they deal with that in terms of where the sediments are occurring and where the water is coming from, and why they can't document where those supposed fissure areas are. It's a fascinating hypothetical problem, but they can't get past the cartoon level. Have at it, Neffy.
Actually, real quick. I think, and good answer, but I think he meant, because he said to both, I'm thinking he wants to know, like, where did we get all the water from your position or worldview, and then Neff was going to go into how he believes all this water.
It's real simple and quick and easy. The water came from within the earth. The Bible states that the fountain, God opened the fountains of the great deep. We know where those are. It's the mid-oceanic ridges. They run around the earth like the seam of a baseball. Giant crevasse in the earth where basalt has bowed up to shut them off. And so the water came from within the earth. There's still massive amounts of water inside the earth. There's an awful lot of water inside the earth, even deep inside the earth. And so what remains in the earth is just what didn't come out during the flood. Where did the water go? Well, it went into the oceans. Imagine you have a balloon full of water. You put a book on top. You open the mouth of the balloon. As the water comes out, the book drops. Right? That's because that's exactly what happened to the earth. As the water that was in the earth came out onto the earth, the crust of the earth sank. The ocean floor sank to fill that vacant space because of gravity. And that water for Noah's flood, you've been drinking it all your life. It's in the oceans now, which are about twice as deep as they were prior to the flood.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Neff. And then did you want to answer it again, maybe, James, like where you believe the water came from, I guess, according to like your specific position?
Oh, well, the oceans, that's been pretty well standard amount of water all that time. How deep oceans are depends on the continental distribution, which has shifted over time. But for the flood, no, it's waters of the deep and the fountains of heaven, which are very vague as to what's going on with that. And betwixt those two elements in the very loose description in that very short section of Genesis where they mention the flood, people can make up all sorts of cute little cartoons, and that's basically what we get. Hydroplate theory and all the rest. In no point has any of that achieved any unanimity on the creationist side, because every single one of them opens up cans of worms in terms of heat and dynamics and rock distribution and where exactly all of these things are happening. That you try to follow out what they think going on and exactly when it's going to turn into a fog bank. Worse even than Neff. It's absolute vague.
Okay, awesome. Looks like that concludes the questions for the most part. Thanks, John, for reading those off. Yeah, once again, it looks like the audience had a good time. The discussion, the debate flew by, a couple hours just like that. So if you guys want to say some final words, plug in your channels or something like that, we'll shut her down for the night.
No, I don't really have anything final to say.
Hey guys, we got one more super chat. Just came in.
Awesome. Okay.
From Jamie Russell. Thank you, Jamie, for your $10 super chat. James, no matter what, remember you can join the body of Christ. No problem. All in good fun. Thanks for a kind of quote unquote answer.
Well, Jamie, if you can rev up a Bible that condemns slavery, that would be impressive to me, but you can't.
The Bible does. It says if a man is found with a man who is stolen in his possession or found trying to sell one, the penalty is death. So God in the Bible takes a harsher stance on chattel slavery.
Are you telling me that you cannot legitimately buy Gentiles as slaves in the Old Testament?
Now you're getting into what is slavery in Hebrew society, and we don't have time to discuss it.
I would love to discuss
another topic to discuss.
Actually, Jamie did just we did miss one question from Jamie, and Jamie, thanks for your super chat. Let me just add, it's for you, James. He says, ask him if a whale was found in the chalk beds. That is what matters for challenging your model. I don't care. I'm just reading it word for word. I don't care what direction it was in necessarily. That was his question.
Oh, I'll have to look on the material, but it's been accounted for. It's not a problem for geology any more than any other fossil. So the chalk bit, that's marine deposit right off the bat. So it's not a problem. And it's not what the creationists claim it does.
Well, I would say it's a tremendous problem because chalk is claimed to form at 1 to 2 centimeters per 1,000 years. And that way, if that's true in gyres, if that's true, you can't have a vertical fossil in chalk. But
not a vertical fossil.
Well, you couldn't have one at all. Whales have been observed by GPS location to disappear completely on the ocean floor in 1 year. The whole whale,
complete fossil, not
even bone. But whales have been found in the vertical position in the mountains of South America by the hundreds of whales, and some of them in the vertical position, which you can't explain with uniformitarianism.
Heading bed. I'd like to see your documentation on that, Neff. Put that in along with all the other stuff that we.
Okay, secular geologists talk about their digs there. Do your own homework, James. I don't do homework for evolutionists.
Okay, well,
that's your way of saying you're never going to put your.
No, that's my way of saying you're ignorant by choice because you won't look into anything, and I'm not going to be burdened with digging stuff up for you all the time.
I do. I am anxious to look into it. Anyway, you'll have to.
Well, good luck. Why don't you do that? Google it when this is over and find out what exists, what you don't want to believe exists.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. Like I said, it was a great debate, very lively. Definitely one to remember. So thanks to the audience for all your questions and super chats. I think we're going to be shutting it down. Praise. It's
thanks, guys.
Great job, guys.
Thanks for